Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek podcast with Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Really glad to have you on board. Do take a few moments if you would, subscribe to the channel, definitely ring the bell, and you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear your thoughts, comments, and thoughts about the show. Yes, and even criticisms if you care to share those as well. And definitely join us on Facebook with our Pest Geek podcast family. We have a growing group there, and you can certainly ask questions and thoughts and your triumphs and trials there as well. So today we have a special guest, Christian Allen from Tailor Pest Control. Isn't that a cute little name? I like it because there was some of the pest control names are like, ooh, it sounds a little bit more violent than, and it doesn't necessarily bother me, but I'm thinking sometimes they're a little bit violent, little too violent. He's out of Louisville, Kentucky. He's the owner and founder, again, of Tailor Pest Control, and he's been only in business for a short period of time, a little over a year now. So he's passed his 1-year anniversary. Congratulations. And he says he's been moving into some wildlife control. And so we're going to talk about some of that transition and some of the trials of just what it takes to run your own business. So welcome aboard, Christian. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on with you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your journey, what you do before you became a self-employed business person. Let us know, what got you into pest control even.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been doing pest control for over 10 years now. Well, almost 10 years, 10 years in February. It started out just as a job. So, I was 21 at the time, no college degree, just out of high school, working odd and end jobs, warehouses, ski lodge, just different little things, seasonal jobs. And my dad knew the owner of the company I worked for previously. And one of his guys was leaving for the police department. And then I was looking for a full-time job. And so Dad's like, well, Chris, he can, he's looking for a job and he might be interested. And so he asked if I was interested. I said yes. And kind of the rest is history. For the first 2 or 3 years, probably it was just a job. Yes, it was interesting. I hated school, but one of my favorite subjects was science. And so the biology and the science aspect of the job was fun. And I was an introvert, a big introvert, still am, but really? I will credit pest control. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Credit, you're fighting it pretty well.
Well, it's something I'm growing out of slowly.
Okay. All right.
But I credit pest control for that because it makes you have to stand in front of somebody and then talk. Right. And they're expecting you to talk because you are the expert.
That's right.
And so they're paying me to come out to tell them what they have. So it helps you with the listening skills, helps with just branching out and meeting new people and then speaking in front of people.
Yeah, so you had 10 years in the pest control working for this other company. Yeah. And so what were your thoughts? When did you start thinking, I'm at a place now? Talk about that decision process, because let me kind of frame it a little bit differently. One of the things that I hear, and again, I don't have employees, and so I used to, but I don't have any employees. One of the things you hear from business owners is their frustration about finding and keeping good employees. So if you've been in the company 10 years, I would assume you were a good employee. I'm like, so why? What is it about business owners? They just can't seem to grow with their workers so that they don't leave.
Yeah.
And so clearly, obviously I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that if you thought, there was a future, by a future meaning, another step, or either wages, or was it wages? Was it freedom? What was it that you were looking to, why make the break?
Mainly freedom.
Freedom.
So I was super happy with the employer I was working for.
Mhm.
It was a small mom and pop company. I was one of five, including the owner. So there was, we're a small company. We made our money, but we were small and we were local. So it was fun. Definitely had like the mom and pop feeling.
Mm.
Um, and it wasn't wages. I was getting paid a lot, more
Okay.
than I'm paying myself now.
Right.
So that was a big adjustment going on my own. But it mainly was flexibility and then freedom. So I had a lot of flexibility with the company I worked for. I scheduled my own stuff. I did the jobs that were assigned to me and could kind of control my schedule.
Mm.
But it was more so freedom with like expanding and learning with different new techniques that are coming out. Um, I have a ton of respect for the owners that I worked for.
Okay.
I have nothing but respect for him, but I think he was in pest control, still is, for like 40 years.
Mm.
And so I can see it now some with me. Just once you've been doing something a long time, you get your tendencies, and this is what you do,
That's
this is
right.
how we do
Yeah.
it. There's no other way type philosophy.
Right.
And so that was just getting a little bit frustrating working, like, there's new ideas coming out, new techniques, things that make it maybe more safe than what, just doing what we've been doing before just because it works.
Right.
um, and just trying out new things. So really it was just, after, so after 2 or 3 years, it became something I really enjoyed. So
Mm.
I found Franklin, Pest Geek podcast, started listening to him, different magazines, PCT magazine, PMP magazine. Then you joined. So started listening to your section of the podcast
Mhm.
and other podcasts out there. So I expanded my knowledge, read different books, bought like the Malice Guide, and just expanded my knowledge. So when I expanded my knowledge, then I introduced myself to like new techniques on how to do things. And while what we were doing working was maybe not the most efficient and
Right.
or maybe not the most safest for the
Right.
environment or for us or our customers.
Mhm.
And so just, there was just differences of opinions on how things should be operated, and
Yeah.
then differences of opinions on just techniques with how to kill bugs and,
Sure.
do
So,
business.
so it sounds like you had uh, a friendly break. It's not like you were, storming out the door and people screaming, and it sounds like it was a friendly break, and so you left in a good way.
Um, I don't know if it was necessarily friendly.
Okay.
So with the disagreements, because he was retiring the year before, or was in the process of retiring the year before I left. And so started going into 2021, I kind of took on like a manager role and
Okay.
started to change how the company ran. So we were, 4 or 5 technicians, but we made our own schedule, which wasn't
Right.
the most efficient way. Called our own people. So I really streamlined everything to where I was calling everybody and making all the schedules, and then everybody else was running a route. Plus, I'd go out and do some routes too. So there's just some disagreements with from the operation standpoint that he wasn't necessarily happy with. And
Mm.
then I was getting frustrated just because there's like, I know we could really expand and grow if we made these changes.
Right.
And he was content. He's happy with where his company's at,
Right.
and there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that.
Right. Right.
I just want to. I'm not necessarily trying to conquer the world, but I do
Sure.
want to grow.
Yeah.
And if if growing wasn't part of his philosophy, which is fine,
Mhm.
then I needed to go my
Move
own
on.
way.
There were the
So
different visions of the
yeah,
future that you had. So yeah, I think some people are small, and they're right. They've reached a point in their life, and that in their they're content. They just want to maintain the status quo because, let's face it, change is hard, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's and different people react to change differently. And that is really a struggle that people have to work through. All right. So now you've started your own company. So what was the conversation like with your wife? I'm a big fan of making sure that when people are going into self-employment, that the spouse has got to be all in. I mean, because
Yeah.
it's can really wreck a marriage. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I did have extensive conversations with my wife. For me, I don't think she was as concerned with it as I was. But that was something that I was super concerned with. Like I said, I was getting paid really well above the average than what any other pest control was paying. And I could prove it because I also interviewed for different jobs just before I started my own company. And I was going to have to take a significant pay cut going to these other companies, even with 9 years of experience.
Wow.
So it was a significant pay cut I was going to take, and then I just wasn't willing to go work for somebody else and run into the same problems. So we talked about it, and the wife was 110% on board with it because she knew I was unhappy with where I was, and I think she knew I could do it. And deep down inside, for me, I think I knew I could do it. I had doubt. But a friend of mine started his own company in a different industry, but he's been telling me for 2 or 3 years to start my own company, and I just said no, I don't want to. I know the type of work I have to do, and I wasn't willing to do it at that point. I wish I would have, but that's neither here nor there.
Sure.
But when I left, we talked about finances. Like I said, I was taking a big hit whether I worked for somebody else or started my own company.
Right.
So the shift of who was the breadwinner per se shifted to where I used to be the breadwinner. Now she's going to have to pick up the majority of the bills and pay for most everything. So got her on board with that. She's part owner with me, even though I do everything. But I run ideas by her all the time. She thinks I'm crazy, but I like her opinion. Even though she doesn't have too much to do with it, I do value her opinion on it. So I run things by her all the time. And then I'm a workaholic as it was, so I was working all the time for somebody else. But then now I do everything, like finances, the marketing, website, phone calls, everything now falls on my plate.
Okay.
And so we really had to work, and it's still a work in progress. But I really had to make it a point this past year to focus on time for just me and her. We don't have any kids at the moment, so it makes it a little bit easier.
Right.
But I still have to make conscious efforts to where the phone gets turned off, or I don't take the phone with me, and we spend time together. Quality time together, make dedicated date nights or, time each day to talk about what she has done, what I've done, like SOPs for marriage. You have standard operating procedures for business.
I like that.
You got to have standard operating procedures for your personal life and marriage.
I like
and
that.
So it's something that wasn't at the forefront when we first started. It was kind of like I was working all the time. She had, she didn't see me, and she was getting frustrated. And so because of the tension, I really had to, sit back and focus on, she is important to me. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't want to keep doing this. And so if that's the case, then I have to make a concerted effort to make it work. And so it's working. It's still a daily progress. Things you got to work on every day.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm really glad. I like the phrase you had there, standard operating procedure for marriage. So that's really special. And I just want to take a time out here and just encourage people. Self-employment, you don't leave the job because it's always with you. And that's probably one of the biggest struggles I had when I was self-employed. And so I just want to encourage everyone, take this advice to heart, carve out time, put it down, and dedicate yourself to spending time with your spouse. It is a whole lot cheaper than divorce. And so if you need an economic reason, I'm hoping we have other reasons besides money. But if you need to have a money reason for it, think of it as an investment in your future. So because divorce can really wreck your life in more than just finances. But I'm really glad to hear that. So you've been now full time self-employed for a little over a year, you said. So you had your 1 year anniversary. And
Yep.
when did you start moving into, well, why don't we give them background, tell us a little bit about the type of pest control you're doing, and then when did you start transitioning to adding on the vertebrate side? And what was
Yeah.
your thought process on that?
Yeah. So I'm a full scale out pest control service. We take care of termites, we take care of bed bugs, fleas, general pests, spiders, ants, wasps, fleas and ticks, outside and mosquitoes. So we're full scale, full operation pest control company. If it's a pest, you name it, we can take care of it. Mice, rats included.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I started the company, um, I dabbled per se in wildlife with the other company I worked for. We did it. We didn't advertise it. We pretty much just did it for our customers that
So
had an issue.
just in-house customers.
Yeah,
Yep.
in-house customers, pretty
Yep.
much. Like we had an occasional call and we'd take it, but it was not something we actually, we focused on.
Right.
And so I didn't focus any training on that.
Okay.
So starting my own company, I knew I was going to do pest control. I knew I could do everything within bug related. And I really didn't have an interest in wildlife. It's very difficult to have a truck or a van, or in my case, I'm running on a small SUV, to have everything that you need for pest control. And then on top of that, wildlife.
Oh yeah.
And so I had zero interest in doing wildlife.
Right.
I something that I could do, but I didn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
But I started in October, right as we're going into fall and winter. And I just kept getting calls, either it was a raccoon or bats or squirrels, whatever the case may be. And I knew some people in wildlife, so I was referring it to them. And I was like, I'm referring a lot of this stuff to other companies, which is fine. I'm okay with that, and they were taking care of them. But maybe I should use that for me and do it myself, because at the time, it's a slow process growing. Right. So I didn't get my first job till like December, even though I started in October. I could have had more jobs or a job sooner if I did wildlife, because I had calls for wildlife when, before I got my first pest control call.
Yeah.
And so it was
probably more freedom, more openness in the space there for wildlife. Yeah. And now when you're talking about were you getting a commission for those referrals? Did you have a commission relationship with those other companies, or were those just
No, they were just referrals, freebie references.
Wow.
I thought about, I was looking into like doing like a referral based and get like some sort of commission, but I never really nailed anything out.
Okay.
With anybody to refer things out to them.
Yeah.
And so, which was fine.
Sure.
The one person I was referring things out to, he also did pest control, so it wasn't very beneficial for me. Right. Because he did pest control for himself.
Sure.
But yeah, so that's kind of how it started. And then, I needed money, and I like money. It's not, money isn't everything, but it does help to live.
Eases the pain.
So it eases the pain a lot.
It does.
So sometime early last year is when I decided to look into getting my permits and wildlife licenses. And, when I looked into it, it's like, it's free to take.
You don't have to pay for your license?
Well, you have to pay for the license. You didn't have to pay to take the test.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I can't remember. I think it's like $50 or $100. I think it's like maybe $100 in Indiana, maybe $150 in Kentucky. I can't remember exactly.
All right.
I do know 100. I think for Indiana, I just paid that this past month
Sure.
for this year. Kentucky doesn't end until like July, I think, for me. But so it was free to take the test. And then for Indiana, well, both Indiana and Kentucky, it was virtual. So Indiana, they're like, here's a link, take it whenever you want within 3 days. So I was like,
Wow.
Oh, so I
That's
took it in my
cool.
car and waiting for another job. And then Kentucky was, yeah, like it's super laid back. And then
That's pretty
Kentucky
laid
was,
back. Okay.
yeah, and Kentucky was more organized. They're like, this is the day you take it. They
Right.
didn't give you the test until that day.
Right.
And then you had an hour to take it.
Okay.
So I took the Indiana test first because it was super easy. So I failed it by like 6 points. But
right.
they gave me feedback for, hey, this is what you probably need to look on.
Okay.
They didn't tell me what I missed, but they said, this is
Right.
what you need to learn.
Sure.
So I said, okay. So I took
that's
that
cool.
feedback. And then, yeah, in Indiana, I was a little bit hesitant because they had like a two try limit, and then you had to wait a year. So I was like, oh shit, I'm on my last try. So then I'm like, well, Kentucky didn't have any limits. I'm like, well, let me go ahead and take the Kentucky test. I took the Kentucky test, passed that one.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, I passed the Kentucky one. So let me read up a little bit on and with the wildlife, it wasn't just the nuisance wildlife. They want you to know everything. So when I say everything, like beavers, fox,
okay.
like all
it's a fur
coyotes.
So it's a fur trapping. Yeah. So it's a fur trapping site. Yeah. This is one of my, that's interesting. That's one of my criticisms of various states, that they treat the wildlife control operator as a glorified fur trapper.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with fur trapping. I love fur trappers, even though they don't always love me back. It's but I call them, they're cousins, but they're not. They have a lot of overlap, but they're different. And so, and the problem is a lot of states haven't figured that out yet. So it's very interesting. So that you're talking about the Indiana one was all these other fur bearers.
Well, Indiana and Kentucky.
And Kentucky as well. Oh, okay.
Are the same. So when I failed the Indiana one, I started to read because I didn't read any of the manuals before I took the test.
So they gave you a set of readings to do that said this material will prep you for this test.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They had like a link, and then I ended up printing it off. But it's pretty much like 90 pages of all the biology and animals that you need to learn about, and the rules and regulations.
And so you're only 6 off without reading it all. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Especially since I don't know nothing about fox or coyotes or beavers.
That's pretty good.
So yeah, I thought I did pretty good. So I ended up passing Kentucky, and then I went ahead and took the Indiana again, and I passed that.
Okay.
So then it was just it was game on at that point, and I didn't realize how much revenue wildlife actually brought me until I sat down and did the numbers last week. And it was 21% of my business. So I didn't start till I think it was like March or April of last year. I didn't really start the wildlife.
So 21% in only 10 months?
Yeah, but for the whole year, it ended up and it ended up being for the full 12 months, 21% of my business. And that's with no advertising, because I wasn't advertising. I did wildlife. I just did it. So it was a big chunk, and a lot, probably 30% of it was like the trapping side of it, but then the rest of it was exclusion work. So exclusion work for bats, exclusion work for like squirrels and raccoons and all that stuff. So it was a good chunk of my business that I'm glad that I had, because it really boosted my numbers for what I did. Because if I didn't have it, I wouldn't have the numbers I had.
Did you find that any of those jobs help you convert those into a pest control contract? Because that's one of the things I always envied about the pest control side, is they had these renewal contracts. Did you ever find that doing a squirrel job helped you get the cockroach work or tick work or something like that, or was it basically almost just two different businesses?
It's almost two different businesses. I did have a couple customers. So so I've had 2, maybe 3 customers that I can think of off the top of my head that I got called out for pest control. Well, actually, there's one I got called out for pest control, and then they had a squirrel problem. They couldn't find anybody to come out to their house to take care of the squirrels. So then
Oh,
I
okay.
got
So
the trapping and
it
the
flipped the
exclusion
other
work,
way.
yeah,
Okay.
off
All right.
off of the pest control. So that worked out well. And then I did have one that called me for a possum in a crawl space.
Mm-hmm.
We removed the possum, but then when I was there, they're like, "Oh yeah, we're having termite problems too." So then I ended up getting the termites and then the general pest regular scheduled maintenance.
Nice.
So yes, so I
Nice.
did
Yeah.
have at least one that I know for sure that was trapping at first,
Mm-hmm.
and then we got now reoccurring revenue
Recurring revenue.
um, from that trapping.
So in terms of your business model, we don't need to talk any prices here. So
Yeah.
don't mention any prices. I'm just going to turn to the business model for your trapping side or your wildlife
Mm-hmm.
control side. Do you use like a flat rate fee, or do you use a visit fee, or do you use a hybrid? How do you go about structuring that?
Pretty much flat rate.
Flat rate. Okay.
I've played with it a lot over the past year, but I'm still flat rate. So it's
Okay. Mm-hmm.
flat rate for 30 days.
Okay.
Ideally, I'm doing like posi sets with traps going
Yeah.
right over the entry
Yeah.
holes. So ideally I catch them within 3 days.
Right.
And
Right.
then, but I've had an occasional time and I had to put a time limit on it. So at first I didn't put any time limit. I was like,
Mm-hmm. No,
it's
yeah.
flat rate for
Right.
for this, and then I had a groundhog job that just ate my biscuits.
Oh yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I hear you.
So
Yeah.
and I caught, it's flat rate, doesn't matter how many animals you catch.
Right.
So we caught
Okay.
everything else, skunks, raccoons, possums. We caught everything else but the stupid groundhog.
Okay.
But we ended up getting rid of the groundhog too. But
Yeah.
I learned my lesson really quickly on that one.
Sure.
But yeah,
Sure.
it's just flat rate for 30 days.
Okay.
And then if we need additional time, like with what would have been the case with this groundhog one, we did per week after that.
Okay. So you're 30 days. So it's either 30 days or if the problem is solved sooner, you're done,
Yeah.
obviously, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's no use putting a trap there when the squirrels are gone after.
Yeah.
And I like the fact you're using positive set. So for those of you in our audience who don't know, there's 3 different types of trapping sets. So you have your baited set, which, you have your trap and you throw bait in the back of the cage. And then you have what's called the blind set, which is like a 2-door set where the animal sort of sees through the cage trap. We're only talking about cage traps here, but the principles work for other traps as well. The animal then walks through in the normal course of business, hits the trigger, but there's no lure. You're simply relying on the movement of the animal. And then a positive set that he was referring to, a positive set is where you're placing the trap, like typically over a den opening, and you're positively catching the guilty animal. I don't necessarily like that phrase, but because it's the only thing that can get in there is what's coming out of the hole. So it's a positive set. So there's some that have multiple doors, and so you can catch more than one out of that set. And there's other ways of structuring it, but it's really a good way. You're not catching the whole neighborhood, not that you would anyways, but it certainly can feel that way at times. It can feel that way at times.
Yeah. So that's what, when I started, like I said, we did some wildlife with the other company I worked for, and that was an issue. So with them, we charged to set up the trap and then per animal caught.
Per animal, yeah.
Well, you bait a set and it's outside. Well, you're catching everything.
That's right.
And the customer's like, "You ain't getting what we wanted you to get."
That's right.
I'm like, well, so you have some happy customers because they're like, well, we don't want to pay you anymore. So pick up your trap and we're done with it.
Right.
So I didn't like that, aspect. So I did talk to a lot of different operators from Facebook. I met a lot of people, and then from Facebook, I found that there were some people local. So then I met them in person and we talked about pricing. And so, I'm all about the customer. So I want the customer to be happy, and perception is king. Unfortunately, that's just the world we live in. So, I didn't like to set the, price to set the trap and then per animal or per day caught, because sometimes it takes some time. And so just a flat rate makes it to where the customer feels like they're getting a good value. And if you do it right, you can catch them within a couple of days, and the customer's still happy that you took care of the problem. And even though it didn't take a month, it took less than a week,
Yeah.
the problem's gone, and that's all they care about.
Yeah.
But
They
it
like
also
that
gives
30 days gives them that little comfort zone too. Yep.
because sometimes it does take a little bit longer.
It does.
And if you're charging per day or or if you're charging per animal, then you're kind of waiting on an animal to be caught, or you're catching other animals that you're not trying to catch.
We hope you've enjoyed this first half of the conversation with Christian Allen, owner of Tailor Made Pest Control out of Louisville, Kentucky. Stay tuned till next week. Come back again and visit us for part 2 of our interview with Christian Allen, the joys and trials of starting your own business and moving into wildlife control. Again, this is Stephen Vantassel, living the wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. You can reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and definitely, of course, you can reach out to me with my email. Let me know if there's any shows you'd like to have covered or topics dealt with, or perhaps even criticisms as well. Then next week, we're going to have part 2 of this particular interview. And again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.